Everything begins with Yuji, the protagonist of the story, facing an extremely powerful creature that attacks him without warning. But suddenly, a fireball hits the monster and completely destroys it. Right after that, a slime gently falls onto Yuji's shoulder. He simply steps aside as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a man from the Adventurers Guild is telling his friends what he witnessed. One night, he saw a slime cast a fire spell powerful enough to take down a gigantic creature. His friends, however, laugh at him, saying he must have been tired and dreaming, since a simple slime could never use such a strong fire spell. At that moment, Yuji walks into the guild with the slime still on his shoulder. He heads to the receptionist, and since he doesn't appear to be carrying anything, she comments that it's okay if he didn't complete his mission. But Yuji calmly interrupts her, saying he didn't fail. Then, the slime slides off his shoulder and begins spitting out dozens of dried flowers from its mouth. All the men present are shocked to see so many flowers, as they know how difficult they are to find. Looking more closely at Yuji, they realize he's actually a tamer. Just then, the guildmaster appears and says that despite the large number of flowers, they intend to buy them all, since they have medicinal value. Yuji tries to explain that he defeated a skeleton monster, but the doors suddenly burst open and a young man rushes in, reporting smoke rising from the forest and sightings of numerous monsters. The protagonist immediately communicates with his slime in the forest, and it informs him that all the monsters are moving in the same direction. Yuji instantly realizes they're heading straight for the city. The guildmaster warns everyone that the adventurers must prepare, as more than 10,000 monsters are approaching the city. He advises everyone to flee as quickly as possible, because the city will be invaded in 10 minutes. The adventurers refuse to flee and say they must protect the city. Yuji then explains that, as a tamer, he can recreate a dragon's fire using a special bone, which might be enough to eliminate the monsters. Many doubt that it's possible, including the guildmaster himself. But the man who had earlier spoken about the slime walks up to Yuji, carefully observes the slime next to him, and recognizes it as the same one that cast the spell. He tells everyone they can trust Yuji. With that, the adventurers begin organizing for battle. They gather at the city entrance while Yuji climbs to one of the highest points. From there, he stays in contact with his wolf, who is gathering the other slimes. To speed things up, Yuji grants the wolf a speed boost, and it dashes away. The slimes, eager to help, also want to show their power. Soon the monsters arrive, and the adventurers throw crystal bombs, but they have little effect, and the real fight begins. Yuji holds the dragon bone and mutters that everything will be resolved in 15 minutes. At that moment, several panels appear before him, displaying detailed information about his taming abilities, slime stats, and a series of spells of various elements. He studies everything carefully, searching for the best strategy. But then he receives a message from the forest. A girl tells him she saw a man in a strange robe holding a lamp with a crystal. He appears to be the one who summoned all the monsters. Yuji instructs the girl and the slime to approach quietly and investigate. They obey. Through the slime, Yuji casts a royal spell and traps the man. Then, he uses another spell to break the redstone's curse. However, when they try to see the man's face, he screams incoherent words of salvation, clearly not in his right mind, and bites a stone, taking his own life. At the same time, the wolf appears before the monster horde and informs Yuji that it is about to arrive. The protagonist orders him to assist the adventurers, who are at a disadvantage. The slimes also arrive, and using a teleportation spell, they launch fireballs at the enemies. Seeing the slimes actually breathe fire, the adventurers become motivated and trust Yuji even more. Meanwhile, Yuji observes a map of the city, but he's worried. There were too many monsters, and he doubted the city could withstand the spell he was planning to use. Then he remembers the spell he used to remove the stone's curse, and has an idea. Apply the same effect to the barrier, making it expand outward. At that moment, the guildmaster's daughter secretly watches him, but all she sees are some runes. Without turning around, Yuji senses her presence, and asks her to tell the adventurers to enter the city. She runs off to carry out the order. Yuji sends all his slimes inside the city, and they spread out, ready to cast the spell. But a problem arises. A monster is still trying to get in, and two adventurers are fighting it. They're losing the fight and shout for Yuji to leave them and protect himself. However, the wolf arrives at high speed, bites the monster's neck, and brings it down, saving the two. They return to the city, and Yuji, impressed, enthusiastically praises the wolf. Then, he activates a barrier that covers the entire city and summons the Hellfire of Death, causing a massive explosion of flames that wipes out everything around. Everyone in the city is stunned, amazed by the spell's power. They wonder how much strength Yuji really possesses, as they had never seen anything like it. The guildmaster comments that Yuji is no ordinary person, since anyone else would have died using such high-level magic. When the explosion ends, Yuji watches everything from a distance, but notices there are still many monsters left. He feels weak, drops to his knees, and, checking his stats, sees that his power is in the negatives. He decides to compensate by using some of his own health, even knowing it will hurt him. With that, he manages to cast the spell one more time, creating an explosion even greater than the last. Right after, he collapses, exhausted from the effort. Later, Yuji wakes up in a bed, with his slime vibrating happily to see him well. The guildmaster's daughter brings him a meal to help him recover. She smiles, happy to see him awake, while outside everyone celebrates the city's salvation. The young woman says it was all thanks to him and his efforts, even risking his life. Then she asks why he chose to save that city, since he could have simply walked away. Yuji doesn't know how to answer. She smiles, stands up, and tells him to rest and not push himself too hard. The staff were quite busy with their tasks, but seeing how everyone around was excited and celebrating, he couldn't hide how happy it made him feel. After a while, the girl showed up carrying some blankets for him because of the cold, but she ended up finding out he had already left through another path. Now, he was traveling alongside the wolf and the slime, who didn't hide how upset they were that he had left without saying anything. They also reminded him that they were starving, since they had used many spells and defeated a group of monsters. The next morning, thanks to a slime, the guildmaster was talking with his daughter. They had found the lamp used by the man who summoned the monsters. They knew he had done it using a stone, but they also recognized a symbol on that lamp belonging to an organization already under suspicion. They immediately sent alerts to the city center. Meanwhile, the protagonist arrived at another city, and upon entering with his slimes, they got so excited that they wouldn't stop talking about eating meat. He remembered they had traveled the whole time without stopping even for a meal, and he felt a little uncomfortable walking around with so many slimes, since it drew a lot of attention. The slimes quickly called him over, pointing at a food stand, and the protagonist ended up ordering almost all the meat available just to feed his wolf and the slimes. Right after that, the church bell started ringing. The stand owner explained that it was a call for everyone who wanted to gather there, as a high priest had arrived in the city and anyone could attend. The protagonist then headed to the local adventurers guild to register. The receptionist was suspicious, as she thought tamers weren't exactly the kind of adventurers that were useful there. However, when she analyzed his skills, she saw he had a rare enemy tracking technique and decided to accept him, since it could be very helpful. The protagonist thanked her, and that was when Rudy showed up. He asked if he was looking for a party. With Rudy were Tina, an archer, and Lisa, who fought with a spear. The protagonist introduced himself, saying this would be his first mission with a group. Rudy's group was a bit disappointed to find out he was a tamer and hoped he wouldn't end up getting in the way. The girls, on the other hand, were more welcoming and wanted to know more about his tracking skills, since they would be useful on the way. They also mentioned that Rudy should be the one worried about rumors regarding the protagonist. Hearing that, he remembered moments from his past and similar situations he experienced with friends from his old world. After that, they began planning the mission to find the place where an earth dragon was hiding. The idea wasn't to fight it, but to stay fully alert since it was extremely dangerous. Rudy would go ahead, with Tina and Lisa right behind, and the protagonist would stay further back, watching for any signs of enemies. As they walked, the protagonist felt calm, knowing he wouldn't need to fight directly. He asked the wolf if anything was new. Wall replied that everything was fine, and the slime said it was watching every rock along the path. The protagonist told both not to fight, only to observe. That's when Wall detected several demonic wolves. The protagonist warned the group that, about 2 kilometers away, there were lots of monsters. The girls were surprised by the distance, as they didn't expect the tracking ability to reach so far. Rudy decided to go check it out, and ran to the location. There, he found all the wolves, and when one of them came from above to attack, Rudy defeated it before the protagonist had a chance to act. The other wolves also advanced, but Rudy faced them with his blades, easily taking them down. Watching it all, the protagonist concluded that he was an excellent fighter. Rudy said that if he kept it up, he might change his mind about him. Silan commented that they could have defeated the wolves themselves, but Yuji pointed out that it's good to know how far your allies can go. Soon after, they came across some thieves. The protagonist thought it best to stick with that approach, and started eating, sharing some food with his slimes. Tina said he got along very well with them, and the protagonist replied that they were trusted companions. The slimes reacted by happily jumping at the comment. The girls then asked how he had gotten so good at tracking and if someone had taught him. The protagonist thought about telling the truth, but he knew not everything could be revealed, so he made up a story about how one day, he just realized he could do it. The girls noticed he was hiding something, and asked him to be honest, but Rudy interrupted, suggesting they rest. He took charge of organizing the watch turns, keeping the harder hours for himself, and leaving the easier ones for the girls, which made the protagonist realize that Rudy was kinder than he seemed. That night, while resting, the protagonist remembered the first time he arrived in that world. He had fallen asleep at the academy, and woke up there, with an interface floating in front of his eyes, showing his name, skills, and stats. Yuji wondered if it was some kind of video game. The tamer skills were used to control animals, and he ended up touching a slime, which was tamed automatically. The slime walked off, and the protagonist decided to follow it, thinking it wanted to show him something. After a while, they reached a cabin in the forest. He went in and noticed that, although abandoned, there were many books inside. He picked one up, and, upon opening it, his panel activated magical abilities from various elements, which surprised him a lot. That caused his stats to rise significantly. Without realizing it, he ended up surrounded by several slimes and ended up taming them all. The skill he gained took him to the level of Sage. At that moment, the slimes started calling him by name, very happy that he could finally understand them. The protagonist woke up from that dream and reflected on everything that had happened that week. One of his slimes then called him, saying that Rudy had run off while on guard duty. They followed him, already suspecting something was off. The two slimes said Tina and Lisa had also gone out, and the protagonist stopped, followed by the two girls. They were watching Tina, who explained she had already been suspicious of Rudy since he volunteered for the watch, as he usually didn't care about others. Everything they said could be heard by the protagonist, thanks to a slime that was nearby. The two Rudys acted strangely, pulling out a dagger and throwing it into a bush, where they heard a sound. Wolf was hiding there, accompanied by a bit of slime. Running as fast as he could, dodging traps scattered on the ground, he reached a hidden camp. The two girls were following, even without knowing exactly where he had gone. Rotus entered the camp and overheard an old man talking to another. The elder said those two girls could bring in a lot of money, just like the boy with them. So when they returned to the guild, they would claim they were attacked and avoid any responsibility, using a slime as an excuse. The protagonist heard everything while hiding, realizing at that moment that this was probably what had happened to his previous group. The old man nodded and stood up, looking at the moon, which was beginning to change color. Something about it reminded him of an old story, a dark omen. One of the men who accompanied him doubted his words, and, irritated, he lifted the man by the neck, making it clear that no one should question his beliefs. It was at that moment that one of the girls triggered the traps. Rudy realized they were nearby. When the group left the camp, they heard the sound of another trap being activated, and out of the darkness emerged a giant creature full of eyes. The old man froze and said he had never seen anything like it, thinking it wiser to hide. He had no idea that the monster was actually the wolf named Lobo, formed by several slimes united together. The wolf gave orders to his slimes, who quickly organized and cast an ice spell, freezing the entire cabin. The girls were impressed by what they saw. When they pulled out those who had been frozen, they recognized the old man. It was Gelios, a wanted criminal with a huge bounty on his head. The slimes ended up devouring Gelios, and one of the girls remarked in surprise that she doubted the protagonist was just an ordinary tracker. Meanwhile, the protagonist thought about the many hours he had spent stuck at his desk in his previous life. He didn't want to relive that reality. His greatest wish now was to be free and not depend on anyone else. The girl didn't give much importance to that and wanted to discuss what to do about the mission. Tina suggested returning to the city since they had lost one of the fighters, but the protagonist explained that, with the help of his slimes, they could avoid the greatest dangers. As he spoke, he wondered if he could trust the girls. Then he pointed to a sheltered spot where they could rest. When they arrived, the girls watched as the slimes lit the fire, set up the tents, and organized the remaining food. They were shocked by how efficient it all was. During the night watch, the protagonist remembered Gelios's words about the blue moon of salvation and the ancient legend that said a great calamity would fall upon the earth when the moon changed color. According to explanations, the blue moon of salvation was a cult, probably involved in the attack on another city. He wondered what kind of disaster Gelios had meant. The next day, the three of them continued searching for the dragon. An unusual wind began to blow around them. Tina mentioned that the wind might be coming from a place known as the Wind Valley. According to rumors, the constant gusts of wind came from the dragon itself. Many had investigated the area before, but without success. The protagonist decided to use his slimes to investigate, but they hadn't found anything yet. Tina said that, with the right equipment, it wouldn't be so hard to find the dragon. Lisa agreed, recalling what the slimes had done back at the camp. The protagonist, however, felt like they were overestimating his abilities. That reminded him of the day he took the test to become an adventurer. When it came time to test magic, he broke the evaluation crystal and had to cast a spell directly on a stone. Not wanting to draw attention, he used a simple fire spell, but when he cast it, everyone was amazed. The instructor said he had never seen anything like it and wanted to know how he managed to cast the spell without reciting it. He explained that silent magic is very advanced and usually weaker. The protagonist tried again, this time whispering, "Fireball." The fireball he launched was so powerful, it completely destroyed the stone, impressing everyone even more. Back in the forest, the protagonist decided he should use weaker spells from then on. He researched several spells and chose a magic limiter, testing it with his slimes, and it worked. His spells became more controlled. Tina commented that it was strange not to find any monsters around. The protagonist explained that his slimes had already taken care of all the enemies ahead. Suddenly, the sky turned purple. No one understood what was happening. A slime informed the protagonist that the environment felt strange. Meanwhile, in the capital, a priest told Lord Rajar about the prophecy of the blue moon. Rajar had no idea what it was about. The priest then showed him an ancient book containing the legend. At that exact moment, a lightning bolt struck from the sky, causing a massive explosion. A blue creature appeared, with many horns and a giant head from which two wings emerged. The protagonist saw it and warned that they needed to get out of there. One of the girls commented on the dragon that had appeared, saying it seemed much more powerful than the one they were looking for. They headed toward the canyon. People said that no monsters had been seen there for years, but the protagonist didn't believe it. He sent Lobo ahead with the slimes, and they eliminated several creatures along the way, facing strong gusts of wind until they found an opening, which was likely the source of the constant wind. Realizing this, Lobo ran back to inform them, but on the way, he was chased by a giant bear. Yuji managed to defeat it with a spell and reached the other side of the canyon. There, he told the protagonist everything that had happened. But before they could react, the ground began to crack open, and in front of them appeared the Earth Dragon. The girls ran for cover, while the protagonist stood still. They shouted for him to hide too, but he refused. He was determined to fight. He started with low-level spells, casting several that had no effect on the dragon. Seeing it wasn't working, he decided to raise the spell level a bit, but not enough to endanger the girls. The dragon lunged with its tail, sending rocks flying everywhere. The protagonist managed to defend himself, and when the creature rolled toward him, he dodged and retaliated by throwing several rocks back. However, this didn't do much damage. In fact, it was all part of a plan. He wanted to lure the dragon into a specific position, and once he did, he used the canyon winds to his advantage, striking the monster hard. Taking that opportunity, he cast a spell called Hellfire, creating an explosion that spread throughout the canyon, shaking the ground. After that, only the dragon's remains were left. The guild girls approached the protagonist, curious, asking how he had done all that, and whether he had used some kind of fuel hidden underground to create those waves of fire. He replied that yes, that's exactly what it was, even though he didn't really understand what had happened himself. Later, they all arrived at the guild. The girl who welcomed them was waiting for news about the mission, and when she heard they had defeated the dragon, she didn't believe it. But then the protagonist pulled the dragon's skull out of the slime, proving it was true. With that, everyone accepted that the dragon had really been defeated. Soon, the news reached the guild leader. The Earth Dragon had been defeated. He went to meet the protagonist to ask for his help. Meanwhile, Yuji ended up exchanging kisses with several people, celebrating the victory. The leader gathered everyone to talk about a new problem, the appearance of the blue dragon of Delicia. He explained that the protagonist had been near the area where the dragon appeared and asked him to describe what it looked like. Yuji thought about how to explain and used one of his spells to make the slime create an image of what he had seen on a leaf. The leader then asked the priest to show something from the book he carried. The priest explained that it was a book of legends, filled with unresolved mysteries. One of the stories was about that very dragon, a being that had grown under the skies and destroyed an entire continent in just 3 days. Everyone was frightened by the information. The priest continued, explaining that, according to the book, the dragon was only defeated by a divine emissary, someone with powers nearly equal to the gods. This discouraged the guild leader, as she remembered an event from 30 years ago when a ritual was performed during an eclipse. The ritual was supposed to take effect exactly 30 years later, with the summoning of a spirit meant to prevent the foretold calamity. The anniversary week of the ritual had just passed, but there was no sign that the spirit had appeared. At that moment, the sky darkened again. The slime warned that the dragon was still growing. The protagonist told the group that, according to his slime, the dark sky was linked to the dragon's growth. The priest then remembered a passage in the legend stating that the dragon would grow larger under darkened skies. Those present were amazed and terrified at the same time. Even in the face of danger, the protagonist said they couldn't just wait to die without trying, and suggested they go all out in battle the next morning. Later, the protagonist was eating with his slimes, who were excited about the feast, but he couldn't stop thinking about what was to come. That's when Tina and Lisa showed up and asked if he was really going to face the dragon. They reminded him they were signed up for the battle, and that there would be a good reward for those who joined. They also said that with him on their side, there was nothing to worry about, since the slimes were incredibly strong and had no equal. Soon after, the priest appeared. He asked the protagonist to come to the church, where he revealed that he wanted to give him something. According to the words of his divine guide, that was the right moment. The gift was a dagger, whose exact power he didn't know, but he believed it could be useful. The protagonist took the item and saw its information. It was the dagger Hades, with unbreakable and blessed properties. Yuji thanked him, but the priest explained that it wasn't from him. It was meant for the protagonist, sent by the gods themselves. That same night, the priest asked his apprentice to pray with him, asking for protection against the dragon. Meanwhile, the protagonist reflected on the battle ahead. He knew many lives could be lost. At that moment, his wolf called out to warn him that the dragon was getting even bigger. That's when he remembered his adventurer exam, when the instructor mentioned he wasn't weak like the others, but strong in an unusual way. That made him realize that now it was his responsibility to try to defeat the dragon and bring peace to the kingdom. Still that night, The protagonist rode off at high speed on his wolf, heading toward the dragon's location. Yuji ordered all the wolves to retreat and decided to launch an attack. Faced with many available spells and the type of dragon they were fighting, he chose carefully and activated the Hellfire of Destruction, launching a powerful fire blast. But his slime warned that the spell had no effect because the dragon seemed immune. The protagonist then checked the blue dragon's stats and saw that its weaknesses were fire and holy weapon. They were protected by a defensive spell cast by the protagonist himself. But another slime noted something strange. The dragon was absorbing magical energy from the forest it had destroyed, growing even stronger and bigger. Yuji concluded that the only option was to fight. He drew his dagger, prepared a spell, and concentrated all his power into it, creating an extremely powerful strike. Then, he rushed toward the dragon. The monster tried to strike them mid-air, but the protagonist used a shield that protected them, though just barely. Everyone rushed toward the dragon, and the protagonist seized the moment when the beast was preparing another attack and launched a slime at it. He rose and began jumping through the air, reaching the dragon's height. With a final push, he threw himself onto the creature and stabbed the dagger straight into its eye. The dragon twisted in pain, but Yuji held tightly to the dagger and released the Hellfire spell, channeling energy through the blade. The explosion sent the dragon crashing to the ground. Just when Yuji thought the fight was over, the monster's tail struck him hard, throwing him against several rocks. Luckily, he had activated a defensive shield just in time, preventing him from being crushed. Checking his stats, he noticed his magical energy was below 0 and his life was hanging by a thread. The dragon took flight again and located Yuji's position, preparing a new attack with intense light. Yuji managed to raise some shields in front of him, but he knew they wouldn't last long. He was aware that he needed to counterattack, but the situation was extremely dire. There were only a few seconds left before he could use the Divine Strike. Thinking about that, he interrupted the dragon's attack and used the opening to unleash his final blow. A powerful light shot across the sky and struck the enemy. Then, Yuji called his wolf, Lobo, who carried him to the wounded monster. With a leap, Yuji plunged the dagger into the creature's neck, calling upon the Hellfire once again. The blade ignited and began to consume the dragon's entire body. Yuji then slashed the monster's neck completely. In the middle of the darkness, a brilliant light appeared before everything vanished. Even knowing how much danger he had been in, Yuji felt relief for having defeated the enemy. At dawn, the city leader knocked on his door, curious to know if the sky had returned to normal thanks to the dragon's fall. Yuji, puzzled, asked how he knew that. The leader explained that the priest had a divine revelation about what had happened, even though he had already left the city. The leader also said that, as a guild, they were ready to act for the good of all, and that if Yuji ever needed help, whether to face another dragon or carry out a simple mission, he could count on them. Yuji wonders why the chief believes in all that, but the man just smiles and leaves in silence, leaving Yuji thinking about everything he heard. Later, a young woman comments that it would be interesting to visit Ricardo's city. She says it's a very pleasant place, known for its good food. Yuji asks if strange things also happen there, like dragons or changes in the sky. She laughs and assures him that no, it's a calm city, and he doesn't need to worry. Hearing this, Yuji says goodbye and decides to head to this new destination. As he walks toward the city, Yuji receives an urgent help request. A girl calls for him urgently, and upon finding her, she explains that the place where he fought the dragon is now covered with mushrooms that weren't there before. She needs his help to collect them. Yuji asks why these mushrooms are so important, and the girl answers that they can be used to create 2 potions, one to restore life and another to recover mana, returning magical power in less than 10 minutes. Yuji agrees to help and, with the assistance of his slime, collects all the mushrooms in a matter of seconds, forming a pile in front of them. The girl thanks him enthusiastically and begins preparing the potions with her magic. However, she realizes that something isn't right. The mushrooms have a very high magical energy level and need crystal clear water to work. Yuji offers help again and transforms his magic barrier into a sort of distiller. Using a bit of purifying slime, he manages to produce completely clean water. He then comments that the potion's color reminds him of the stones used by the sect. The girl, hearing this, observes Yuji and remembers the day they met. She was in very bad shape, lying among the remnants of a tree when he found her. At that time, Yuji had used a slime to transfer some of his magical energy to her, and that was enough for her to recover. In the same situation, he had removed the curse from the stone, but ended up releasing several monsters. Quickly, Yuji created a barrier around them, and inside it, caused a fire explosion that eliminated all the creatures. Now, she explains that the potion has the same color as the stones because of the essence of the dragon, which is the magical part left by these creatures when they die. This essence gives rise to new beings, like the mushrooms. Yuji listens attentively as she adds that this energy is neither good nor bad by itself, but those who make the sect's stones use it with darker, more destructive magic. At this point, the water is ready, and the girl finishes making the potions. She hands them to Yuji, thanking him deeply, but warns that she needs to return to her forest. Yuji says that if she needs anything, she can look for him without hesitation. Later, Yuji crosses a forest covered in thick fog. This indicated that the city was near, but visibility was almost zero. Lobo, his companion, picks up the scent of people and guides them to what seems to be the city's entrance. Yuji enters and is greeted with strange smiles by the townspeople. One of them greets him and warns that walking through the fog is dangerous, suggesting that he spend the night there. Yuji declines, explaining that he doesn't intend to stay and only diverted his path because of the fog. His real destination is Ricardo. The man apologizes for the behavior of the others, saying that visitors are rare around there. Yuji gets up to continue his journey, but before leaving he asks a question. He wants to know the name of the city. The man smiles and says that it is the city of the Messiah. As they were about to leave, the slimes commented on how the people seemed a bit strange but friendly. On the other hand, our protagonist remained silent. He felt something wasn't right in that place. Meanwhile, the man was speaking to someone through a magical crystal ball. He talked about Yuji's visit, but the other person explained that he was just a tamer, so he wasn't someone they needed to worry about. The next morning, the man promised to extract the dragon's essence from the canyon and cleanse the contaminated world. After walking for some time, our protagonist left the fog and came across a path covered in snow. This was very strange, as, according to the girls, Ricardo's city was known for its warm climate. Still, he pressed on, deciding to look for a spell to help them stay warm as they moved through the cold. Soon he reached the city's entrance and asked the guards what was going on. They explained that the snow had started falling out of nowhere and had been going on for 10 days. They were trying to get used to the unusual weather. Yuji entered the city and walked through the snow-covered streets until he found the place the guards recommended, the Find the Tiger Call Pavilion, famous for offering the best food in the city. When he entered, a girl greeted him but warned that the place was closed during the day. Yuji asked when it would open again, and the girl explained that they couldn't reopen because they were using all the firewood to stay warm and couldn't cook. Yuji didn't give up and asked if they only needed firewood. The girl explained that it had to be very dry, and with the weather, it would take more than a year to reach the ideal point. Yuji thanked her and headed toward the forest, where he asked the slimes which tree would be best to use as firewood. None of them knew the answer, so he decided that one of them would have to help him. He summoned an axe with his magic and wondered if he should cut the trees, but soon dismissed the thought and struck the trunks of several trees at once. With the help of the slimes, he made a pile of firewood. Then, he searched among his skills for one that could help him dry the wood and found one called Slime, which absorbs moisture. With the slime's assistance, he activated the skill, and the slime managed to eliminate all the moisture from the firewood. Yuji asked his slimes to store the firewood, and they returned to the cooking area. The girl was surprised and called the chef to see if the wood he brought would be useful. The chef examined the firewood but declined, explaining that it was too dry and would burn too quickly. However, as he spoke, Yuji used a hydration spell to return the wood to its original state. When the chef grabbed it again, he was surprised, as the wood was perfect for cooking, something he had never seen before. He then ordered the ovens to be lit, so they could start cooking again. The chef asked Yuji how he had obtained the wood, and Yuji explained that a slime had created it. The chef didn't quite understand, but commented that with that type of wood, he could create something very special, although he needed a bit more. Yuji then ordered the slime to gather all the firewood it had, and it dropped a large pile. The girl and the chef were shocked, but Yuji asked the other slimes to hydrate the wood, just like he did with the last piece. The chef thanked him, saying he never imagined slimes could do such a thing, and that he would prepare one of the best dishes to reward him later. The chef then handed Yuji the dish, which he tasted and was amazed by the flavor. It was the best food he had ever eaten since arriving in this world. Yuji thanked him and said he was looking forward to trying more dishes. The girl thanked him but also warned that they couldn't use all that firewood just for cooking, as the city was facing a wood supply crisis and many people didn't have enough to heat their homes. Yuji understood the situation and stood up, promising to return the next day, although he still didn't know how much firewood was needed. He then decided to go to the Adventurers Guild, where he noticed the only requests were related to firewood. He wrote down his name and was told that he could leave through the North Gate, where an instructor would explain the specific type of wood they needed. Upon arrival, the man explained that they currently needed 5 tons of wood per day for the entire city, but they didn't have the capacity to get all that, since no one expected such a drastic climate change. Other nearby cities offered help, but it still wasn't enough. Yuji asked if the city of the Messiah was among those helping, and the man explained that place had been deserted for a long time. He asked Yuji to show what he could do, though he didn't believe he was that strong. Yuji, with impressive speed, cut the wood and made all the pieces the same size. The instructor watched in silence, impressed, and had no criticisms, just many doubts about how he was able to do it. Afterward, Yuji dried the wood and cut more. When they returned to the guild, the instructor told the person in charge that everything was thanks to Yuji, as his slime had dried and transported the wood he cut in less than an hour. The girl mentioned that she had heard of an old legend at the church, which said that someone could take a slime and use it to transport many things. This made Yuji remember the priest who gave him the dagger, and he thought about asking him about it the next time he met him. Afterward, Yuji asked where he could leave all the firewood, as there was no more space at the place, and he had over 15 tons. The guild manager suggested storing it in the slimes. In the end, he left the wood outside, and everyone was amazed, but Yuji knew he needed to gather more since that would only last 3 days. He spent the rest of the day collecting a lot of firewood. The next day, after receiving payment from the guild, he returned to the restaurant to try a dish even better than the previous one. The chef said he knew what Yuji had done for the entire city, and this was his way of thanking him. Yuji tasted the stew and was transported by an explosion of flavors. It was so incredible that he even compared it to a meal worthy of the gods, something both Wool and the slime agreed with. The chef was happy but commented that this wasn't his best dish. The girl explained that her field had been attacked by monsters that ate her best herbs, and he could prepare something even better if he got better herbs. Yuji stood up, asking what type of monster was causing the problem, and later met with her in the field around the plantation, accompanied by his slimes, searching for a greedy boar that was destroying the crops. The ISL, driven by hunger, finds a boar and tries to defeat it. However, upon realizing its strength, it asks for magical help from the protagonist. Yuji then uses some fireballs that hit the boar. Although there were several fireballs, it didn't take long for more than one boar to be eliminated. However, the slime reveals something strange happening in that location. When the protagonist investigates, he ends up discovering a crystal ball. A dad observes the ball, but doesn't know what it is. He only feels that it emits a large amount of magical power. When Yuji touches it, the environment becomes dark because the ball absorbs his power. This makes Yuji realize that the ball is the true essence of the dragon, and it transforms into the stones used by the sect. The protagonist then asks Adad if a place with so little magical power could get so cold, and the girl responds that yes, this could happen. She also explains that in places with a lot of magical power, the climate would become hot. Yuji then realizes that the snowfall is caused by that object and asks Adad if it appears naturally. She answers no, because the object has human magical characteristics, different from Yuji's. Yuji decides to try to purify the stone. Using a spell, he creates a barrier and then activates the spell to eliminate the curse. The effect works, and he asks another slime to search for more of these stones. After some time, they manage to purify more than 100 stones, forming a perfect circle. Suspicious that something special is at the center of the circle, they proceed to it and feel a strange sensation. The trees around are very unusual, and Yuji believes that this is camouflage. He asks the wolf to remove the other slimes, as he plans to destroy that part of the forest. Drar, who is not happy with the decision, worries about nature but eventually agrees, as the magical stones could cause great disaster. Moreover, the forest would naturally regenerate over time. Yuji summons Hellfire and creates a massive explosion in front of them, creating a huge crater. At the bottom of the crater, there is an entrance, and Yuji decides to go in to find out what's going on there. He needs to understand what's happening and save the city, as the excellent food is at stake. Upon breaking down the door, he finds a staircase but can't see much beyond that. Yuji descends with his slimes and tells Drar to leave because what they might find there could be very dangerous. After exploring for a while, they reach a room with a huge machine. Yuji is surprised to see such advanced technology in this world. The slimes, in turn, call them to another room, where Yuji finds the stones he was destroying, discovering that the place is a factory for the amulets. Suddenly, a noise catches his attention. Two men, clearly members of the cult, pass by in a hurry, discussing the critical state of the stones and saying they needed to inform their leader, Javier. Yugi decides to proceed cautiously. His slimes, on the other hand, spread out, eager to investigate everything. Yugi casts an invisibility spell on them so they can explore unnoticed. After a while, the slimes find two other men and follow them to a door with two levers. They activate the levers, and the door opens, revealing a staircase that leads back to the Messiah's city. Yugi begins to realize that all of this is related to the cult, and concludes that they are hiding in an abandoned city to create the stones. While thinking about this, he overhears the men discussing the destruction of the curse's sources. Furious, Javier stands up and orders a group of followers to search for the magical stones, as the number 108 has not been reached. What matters to him is recovering as many as possible. When one of the men asks what should happen if they find the stones, Javier orders them to kill them, because without the curse's source, there's no reason to stay. The only goal now is to recover the stones. Yugi, on the other hand, won't allow lives to be taken in the city, and orders his slimes to spread through the forest around Ricardo's city. He also instructs the other slimes to gather as much information as possible in the city. In a library full of documents and books, Yugi asks the slimes to collect everything quietly. In the forest, they discover several cult members. Yugi uses a net spell to trap the two men, but before he can do more, the men chant a spell and take their own lives. Several slimes draw Yugi's attention, saying they've found a locked door. He goes over and notices it has 5 lamps. Yugi orders a slime to stand in front of each lamp and uses a wind spell to extinguish them. This activates a mechanism, and the door opens, revealing a treasure trove with many jewels and gold coins. Among the relics is even a skeleton. However, one slime warns that someone is approaching, and quickly, Yugi and his slimes consume everything there. A girl who was at the scene, seeing everything empty, runs to warn Javier. The leader soon realizes that the theft was done by the same person who caused the explosion. He believes the explosion wasn't a direct attack, but rather a consequence of a device that would have been activated when everyone in the city died. This device, as its name suggests, would burn everything to ashes. Now aware of all this, Yugi realizes he shouldn't use his spell to destroy everything. Meanwhile, Javier orders his followers to take revenge on the thief. Each of them grabs a dagger and chants a curse, taking their own lives. At that moment, the device is activated. Yugi then orders his slimes to gather, and using an explosion beneath them, sends them far away from the danger. However, he still needs to protect the rest of the city. Not knowing the intensity of the explosion, he creates defensive barriers throughout the city. But then, the earth splits open, and a green flame emerges, destroying everything in its path and breaking the first barrier. Yugi knows he won't be able to resist the force of the attack and begins searching for a stronger barrier among his spells. But when he can't find one, he decides to create a new, even more powerful barrier. After studying various options, he combines spells from different elements, such as Frozen Curse and Black Fire, creating a spell called Total Isolation Matrix, which is activated just as the last barrier is about to give way. They surrounded the city, trying to control the destruction. But while doing this, their magical power exceeded the safe limit, eventually alerting them to the risks of excessive magic, which was starting to affect their lives. On the other hand, our protagonist was doing his best to keep everything under control. With each second, he felt more tired, weaker, but when releasing an explosion of concentrated energy, the curse that haunted him disappeared. He was surprised to see that his barrier had withstood all that power, but his life points had dropped drastically, leaving only 100,151 when he had over 3,000 before. Lobo suddenly appeared from the ground, where he had been hiding, and excitedly commented that they had managed to survive. When they returned to the city, everyone was at the entrance waiting for him. They were worried as they hadn't seen him since he went out to face some monsters. And with explosions that looked like meteor showers, no one knew what had really happened to him. Our protagonist smiled, saying he was glad the city had not been affected. The instructor commented that everything that happened had caused the cold wave to move away from the city. He was right. The snow had disappeared. The instructor then congratulated him and invited him to a party being organized to celebrate the end of the cold. Yuji accepted the invitation. When he arrived, everyone started calling him the protagonist, as, thanks to him, the city now had enough firewood in case the cold returned. And so, the party was a grand celebration. Our protagonist accepted the invitation, and the restaurant owner, smiling, told him that the food was especially delicious due to the elimination of the boar. He had the best herbs and prepared the best version of his dish. The protagonist, curious and excited, tried it, and the taste surprised him so much that he nearly fainted at that moment. It was as if he had been transported to another place, thinking about all the kinds of amazing meals. He fell unconscious, to the ground, overwhelmed by the taste. When he woke up, it was already late in the afternoon, and he remembered he needed to investigate the documents he had received from the city. When he tried to read a scroll, he noticed the letters disappearing as if they were being erased, which happened several times until he found a readable scroll. It was a list of targets he was supposed to eliminate, with names linked to the Blue Moon cult. However, when he looked at one of the surnames, he saw that it was his. That night, a group of assassins, after eliminating several targets, reviewed the same list and discovered that the last name was that of our protagonist. They were given the mission to eliminate him the next day. The assassins then went out in search of him in the forest. The man in the group commented that he was looking forward to finishing the mission and moving on to the next objective. However, the girl threw a knife that pierced a snake and warned the guy to be more careful, as they didn't know how much of a threat the target represented. He then asked what would happen if they eliminated him, and the girl responded that if he did, she would make him pay with a lot of pain. But if our protagonist became a threat to them, she would make him suffer herself. She seemed a bit disturbed as she said she would torment the protagonist until he died. Our protagonist, on the other hand, walked thoughtfully. He knew that the decision he had made, by leaving the city, was to avoid putting anyone at risk. However, when he told the girl from the guild, she was impressed, but suggested he go to Boginia, a city where he could get an excellent armor. As a beast tamer, this would be very useful. She also recommended a master craftsman named Geigel, who was one of the best armor makers. Our protagonist thanked her for the tip and began his journey to find Boginia. As he walked, his slimes were excited to know they were going to a new place. However, during the trip, one slime told him they were being watched. The assassins were still after him. After a while, our protagonist pretended to sleep while listening to what the assassins were saying. The man suggested they eliminate our protagonist once and for all. But the girl warned that the guilds were already suspicious due to the mysterious deaths, so it was better to be careful and observe if he was truly a threat. She told her partner that if the target attacked them, she would take care of the revenge alone. The boy, upon hearing this, decided not to interfere and let the others finish the mission. He also mentioned that our protagonist seemed like just a simple tamer and that they shouldn't waste too much time on him. In the end, they decided to keep observing the protagonist that day to determine how dangerous he was. Meanwhile, Yuji realized that the assassins were actually the ones on his list and started observing their skills. He began to think that he might be in this situation since he couldn't simply eliminate them without raising suspicions from the sect. When he arrived at the city and went to Geigel's workshop, he analyzed the armors on display, but when he saw the price, he collapsed in shock. The assistant kicked him out and he walked down the street until he bumped into a man who knelt down, asking for forgiveness. Then, he found a food stall but didn't have enough money. They decided to leave with their heads down, but the slime helped him get some coins. With a bit of money, they went to a bar where he pretended to sleep after drinking a lot. The girl, still spying, commented that she thought he was very weak. Yuji knew he had to pretend to be weaker, so that the assassins would leave him alone for a while longer. After that, our protagonist accepted the mission to capture a monster that looked like a bull. Once there, he informed his companions that they wouldn't use magic, as they needed to appear weaker to those watching them. W asked how they would complete the mission. Our protagonist said he wouldn't act like regular tamers, and that it would be the wolf who would take care of it. The wolf, scared, didn't know how to handle it when a bull attacked him, but in the end, he crouched down and managed to bring the bull down. This made him happy, remembering that before, he was a very strong wolf. Our protagonist remembered the moment when he first found him. He had trapped him with a net spell, and the wolf, scared, begged for mercy. Now, with renewed strength, the wolf easily defeated both bulls. But soon, the assassin started doubting Yuji since he had tamed such a strong wolf. So, the protagonist used a spell to give more strength to the bulls, lifting them several times. To give the impression that he was weaker, he used magic to boost the bulls. The wolf, seeing this, ran back. But after dodging a rock, he faced the bulls. Our protagonist thought about casting a magical expulsion on the wolf, but he refused, saying he didn't need it. He knew how to handle the bulls. The protagonist, in turn, encouraged him, and the wolf, with his renewed strength, struck the bulls with a single blow. The girl, watching the scene, commented that the wolf didn't seem that strong, since it took time to defeat the bulls. The protagonist, on the other hand, felt happy knowing they believed he was weaker than he actually was, without realizing that everything was happening exactly as he had planned. One bull charged at him brutally. With a quick movement, he used his reflexes and, in less than a second, created a magical barrier that took the bull down in one hit. However, he was soon surprised to realize that, by doing that, he had shown too much skill in front of the assassins watching him. They were still processing what they had just seen, and it was only after a few seconds that they concluded he didn't pose a real threat. After all, he was just a tamer with a bit of luck. Without wasting any more time, the assassins decided to leave, leaving only Yuji behind. On the other hand, the protagonist felt relieved, knowing that his plan had worked. He asked his slime to come back, but the slime replied that they were still discussing the next target, who, to his surprise, was a priest that the protagonist recognized. The slime followed them to a place where the assassins were talking to their leader. They reported that Yuji was just a tamer and didn't pose any danger. The leader thanked them but revealed that the Messiah and his people had been eliminated. No one knew exactly who had done it, but a purifying flame had been used, which meant that whoever did this would be the next target once identified. After explaining this, the leader ordered them to search for the priest, and if he was truly a threat, to eliminate him. After that, the leader said goodbye, and the girl commented that the next target would be Stale's father. The protagonist listened to everything carefully, knowing that he couldn't let the assassins act freely. Using his slime, he froze the assassins, buying time to learn more about the priest. While thinking about why the target was the father, especially because the leader seemed to know so much about him, the protagonist wondered what this meant. The next day, he went to Geigel's house in search of armor. The boy, upon seeing him, didn't want to accept him, thinking he was a beggar, but the teacher scolded him, explaining that he chose his clients. The teacher observed the protagonist and the slime carefully, noticing that there was a lot of magic and their power was so great that it radiated magic throughout the environment. The teacher then explained that there was no ready-made armor for someone with such a high level as Proteus's slime, but that he could try to make a special armor. However, he had a problem. He needed strong enough materials to withstand the slime's power. The professor showed a gem obtained from a fire dragon, one of the most powerful he had ever encountered, and explained that, although it was a very good material, it would not withstand Proteus's power. For that, something even stronger would be needed, like a blue fire dragon gem. These dragons were much stronger than common fire dragons, and extremely difficult to find and defeat. Geigel shared that his veterans, who were dragon hunting specialists, were usually defeated when they encountered a blue fire dragon. However, he said that if they managed to obtain a blue dragon gem, it would be enough to create armor that would truly protect the protagonist. With that, the protagonist understood the situation and decided to go in search of the gem, but first asked if there were dragons stronger than the blue fire dragon. The professor explained that theoretically there could be, but he had never heard of anyone capable of defeating them. After that, the protagonist went to the Adventurers Guild, where he requested all missions related to fire dragons. The guild master replied that these missions weren't very useful, since fire dragons were immune to offensive magic, and their scales were so thick that they could barely be penetrated by physical attacks. The only known weakness of these dragons was water, and hunters usually carried large amounts of water to defeat them. The protagonist, curious, asked why they didn't use water magic to defeat them. The girl in charge of the guild, slightly irritated, explained that no one had enough magical power to conjure the amount of water needed to defeat a fire dragon. The protagonist then confidently stated that he was an expert in water magic and would have no problem defeating them. The guild also warned him about a river he would need to cross before reaching the mountain the fire dragons resided. This river was home to a creature called the piranha, a viscous, carnivorous fish. The guildmaster showed a reward for capturing the fish, and explained that the piranha waited on the river's surface for a human to drag them to the depths and devour them. The protagonist, determined, decided to take on that mission as well, which made the girl even more irritated at him for wanting to take on so many missions at once. The next day, the protagonist arrived at the riverbank and wondered if it would be safe to continue up to the mountain. The slime suggested they ask first, and when the protagonist bent down to investigate, he noticed the slime was carrying a fire slime. It looked a bit strange, but the slime informed him that it was a good day to continue toward the volcano. When they reached the riverbank, the protagonist began looking for signs of the piranha. But since his slime knew nothing about the fish, he had to improvise. Using his magic, he created a mud net and cast it into the river, hoping to capture the piranha. After some time, the slime said there were no signs of the fish, but they were observing a cave below, which piqued their curiosity. However, seconds later, the fish appeared and chased them, prompting them to quickly run away. The protagonist, using his spells, managed to cast a fireball at the fish and finally defeat it. As they walked toward the volcano, the slimes chatted among themselves, wondering what it would be like to be in a volcano. The protagonist, on the other hand, when he looked ahead, he noticed several fire dragons in front of him. His slimes were so distracted that they didn't notice the dragons until the protagonist alerted them. All the slimes began trembling with fear, and the protagonist quickly realized that they feared the dragons, as their mothers had always warned them about the danger these monsters posed. With that, he decided to act alone, and advanced toward one of the dragons, summoning a jet of fire that immediately knocked it down. The protagonist, impressed, realized that the dragons were in the volcano, and that the temperature there was so high that water would severely harm them. The dragon released a large amount of steam and soon dropped a gem. The slimes, full of curiosity, approached to see the dragon. They commented among themselves that the dragon didn't seem as scary as they had imagined, which motivated them even more. Since they could also cast water spells, they told the protagonist they were ready to eliminate anything. Yuji, seeing their excitement, felt happy, and soon they began defeating all the dragons that appeared at that moment. At one point, one of the slimes informed that they had found a blue dragon. When the protagonist looked at it, he noticed it was much larger and more resilient than the others. He ordered 10 slimes to surround the dragon and then summoned a water jet for each of them. The dragon, visibly annoyed, snarled, but the spell wasn't enough to defeat it. The protagonist thought for a moment, and realizing it was harder than it seemed, decided to summon an ice magic. The dragon was temporarily frozen, but quickly melted the ice and freed itself. Thinking quickly, the protagonist ordered his slimes to form a barrier in front of the dragon. Then, he summoned a mid-level ice magic, amplified tenfold. The spell was cast with force, and an ice tower completely covered the dragon. Although the ice tried to melt, the magic was too strong, and after some time, the spell vanished, leaving the dragon defeated on the ground. Golf, who had been watching the whole thing, was surprised by the victory. The dragon dropped a gem, which would be useful for the necessary armor. Meanwhile, the slimes took care of devouring the rest. With the victory secured, the protagonist decided that, along with his slimes, he would spend the rest of the day defeating the remaining dragons. By nightfall, he returned to the guild and informed the guildmaster that he had completed all the tasks. The guildmaster was impressed upon learning that the protagonist had defeated 202 fire dragons. Yuji explained that despite that, the fish had been the hardest part, as it wasn't on the surface, but hidden in a submerged cave. The guildmaster thanked him for the information and wrote it down in his book, as having this data about monsters would be very useful for future battles. Later, the protagonist met with Giggle and handed him the blue dragon gem. Giggle, along with the boy, was completely surprised to learn that he had defeated such a powerful monster. The protagonist explained that this was only possible thanks to his slimes, and that it was almost by luck that they managed to defeat it. The professor then assured him that he could use that gem to make armor for Wall without any problem. The protagonist mentioned that he still had another blue dragon gem, which he could use for something useful with his slimes. Giggle, still surprised, commented on the fact that the protagonist had defeated 2 dragons of that level. Yuji, in turn, mentioned that, if needed, they also had many fire dragon gems, and the slime then spread more than 200 gems across the table. Seeing this, Giggle and the boy reacted with complete disbelief. The boy initially thought all the gems were fake, as he didn't believe anyone could defeat so many dragons. However, the professor checked each one and confirmed they were genuine. Additionally, they were in perfect condition, almost like transparent glass, with no imperfections. This indicated that the gems had been collected very quickly, which meant the dragons had suffered a lot, something that caught the master's attention even more. This was more than enough for him to start working on the armor the protagonist needed. The next day, the protagonist went to the craftsman and observed the armor he had created. When the slime wore it, he noticed that his speed had increased significantly, and he was moving effortlessly, almost as if floating. The protagonist, seeing this, thanked the professor for the amazing armor and asked if it would withstand a magical increase. The professor answered that it would, without any problem. Then, the protagonist cast a spell to enhance the strength and resistance of his companions, which made them move even faster, to the point where they became almost invisible to the naked eye. Giggle explained that, besides providing more speed, the armor would also help simulate a battle, allowing the slimes to cast offensive spells more effectively. The protagonist agreed, and then used the slime to cast a mid-level ice spell. The spell was much more powerful than before, even stronger than when he had faced the dragon. The professor and the boy were stunned by the spell's power. The protagonist then asked them to keep his power a secret. Later in the workshop, the professor and the boy realized that the slime gem couldn't handle such magical power and got damaged. Giggle asked the protagonist if he usually used even stronger magic. The protagonist admitted that sometimes, yes. The professor explained that this armor was the best he could make with the available materials, but there was a better option, although it was almost impossible to obtain. He explained that the best option would be a gem from a bigger fire dragon, but no one believed anyone could defeat one of those dragons. This type of dragon lived deep in a volcano, under the lava. The professor explained that the dragon barely showed its head, but if someone approached to pour water into the lava, it would become very angry. Meanwhile, the protagonist, in his room, began thinking about how to defeat this dragon. That's when a slime warned him that the dragons in the volcano were acting strangely. He remembered that the leader of the assassins had talked about a plan, and to make things worse, he had said something big was about to happen. He decided to send his slime to investigate. At that moment, he felt that something was wrong. When he looked out the window, he noticed that the volcano was starting to erupt. In the shadows of the fire, he saw the figure of a giant dragon lurking. The protagonist asked the slime if it was okay, and the slime replied affirmatively. It explained that this was likely the largest fire dragon, but for now, they didn't need to worry about it. However, if anything changed, the slimes would have to report immediately. Meanwhile, 2 strange men were approaching the fire dragon. One of them commented that the dragon would be the target and asked what would happen if they couldn't defeat it. The partner replied that they shouldn't worry because a man named Ordar had promised that his plan would succeed. Hearing this, the protagonist realized that Ordar must be in another city. He used his slime to cast a magical net and try to capture them. However, the men noticed the net and dodged it, showing that they were not amateurs. The 2 searched everywhere, and one of them even thought the spell had been cast there. The other said that it might be a trap set for a dragon. Then, they kept walking, while the protagonist, with his slime, cast a new net, this time from behind them. But the men dodged again. One of them drew a dagger and tried to attack the slime, which made the protagonist reveal himself quickly. A new magical net appeared quickly, and, catching the men off guard, our protagonist realized that many others were approaching. The men, surprised, knew that a tamer had caught them, and wondered why they hadn't eliminated the enemy, since Yuji was on their list. A spell was cast and the men fell dead. Seeing this, our protagonist recognized that they belonged to the Blue Moon sect, and ordered the slime to investigate the nearby barrels. He observed and commented that they were carrying something very similar to the cursed stones they had found before. When our protagonist used his magic and brought Dryat, the girl looked at the barrels and mentioned that the water in them was the cause, but he explained that it wasn't as strong as the cursed stones. Although the water wouldn't be able to defeat a dragon, if it was thrown at one, it would definitely make it furious, which would make its power increase. Our protagonist then instructed the girl to purify the water and cast a spell. Meanwhile, Daddy says goodbye to our protagonist, telling him that he needs to return to the forest, and that if he ever needs him, he can call him again. The living room warns that he needs to leave soon, as a storm is approaching. The city goes into chaos, with people fleeing their homes because of the rain. At this moment, the protagonist spots the dragon in the distance and remembers what the landlord had told him. The dragon never wakes up during rainy times, unless there's an exception. 50 years ago, the dragon had awakened in the middle of a storm because the water bothered him so much that he left the volcano and destroyed the city of Boginia with his fire. The older dragon began to move, and the others informed the protagonist that the dragon was approaching the city, which was now being evacuated to save the people. Meanwhile, two people approach him from behind. When he turns around, he realizes it's Father Staley, accompanied by his assistant. They talk for some time in the church, and the priest tells him he's there because of a divine revelation. He reveals that he knew the protagonist would arrive, and that the guild had ties to the Blue Moon. The priest confirms this and says that in this place, he will be safe. The protagonist, in turn, prepares to hear Staley's story about his past with Walter. It all started when he and some friends formed a rebel group with the intention of honoring their fallen companions. It was then that Aaron founded the Church of the Blue Moon. Initially, the number of followers was small, but it soon grew, and Walter, an extremely faithful man, joined the church, surrendering his soul to the cause. He quickly became a key figure in the church, although his true intentions were much darker. The presence of the Father, while Staley prayed, received a divine message ordering him to destroy the Church of the Blue Moon. However, he was unwilling to give up his dream or everything he had built, so he ignored the command. A few days later, the church was attacked, and he was the only one who managed to escape. His companions weren't so lucky and lost their lives in the fire that consumed the place. The attack was orchestrated by Walter, who was trying to take control of the church, which was now changing the direction of the faith they had followed. Walter wanted to lead their faith in a more radical direction, seeking to transform the world into something completely new. This is how the Blue Moon Salvation sect emerged, led by Walter, who now had influence in various regions. The father then explained that he had come to the city to warn the protagonist about the sect, as he received new divine revelations that informed him chaos was approaching and that people would be led astray by a corrupted light. He explained that this contaminated light was Walter and his sect, who would bring the world back into chaos. But according to the revelation, a divine emissary would rise to prevent this fate. The father said the protagonist would be that divine emissary, as the legend said that whoever wielded the dagger would be an envoy of the divine. The father advised him to prepare to fight against Walter. Upon hearing these words, the protagonist left the conversation, and the father's assistant questioned why he didn't tell everything, as there was much more to the revelation. The father replied that if he had told the whole truth at once, the protagonist would probably not accept the mission. Meanwhile, a spy was informing Walter about the meeting between Father Stell and someone who was likely the emissary. Upon learning that it was Yuji, Walter instructed his subordinates to stay alert and not cause any trouble. He then returned to his machine, repeating his father's words. On the other hand, the protagonist reflected on Walter and what he meant for his origins, but couldn't understand his connection to everything, as the idea of being the emissary simply because he carried the dagger seemed strange to him. He also remembered the words of the guild leader, who spoke of a powerful sage with incredible magical abilities, capable of moving things with his magic. The next day, Yuji went in search of his father, but was informed at the church that Father Stell and his assistant had left on an emergency. The protagonist left the city and asked his slimes if they had seen two people in robes leaving. They confirmed that they had seen the two heading toward the forest in the morning. The protagonist then instructed them to follow them and report back on what happened. Meanwhile, the father and his assistant arrived at a magical tree, and after a prayer and using a necklace, they managed to remove a curse that was blocking the entrance to a cave. They knew they had reached the place where Walter was. Back to the protagonist, he found his slimes, who told him they saw his father enter a dark place. They warned him about the place, saying that no one had ever come out of there. The protagonist, determined, asked them to take him to the location. Upon arrival, his slimes were terrified by the dark magic of the place. Yuji used a powerful spell to break the curse, and thanks to that, was able to enter the cave. Meanwhile, the father and his assistant were walking when two men appeared with the intention of attacking them. The father calmly created an anti-magic shield and used another spell that made the attackers retreat. Soon after, they reached a door that opened, revealing a room full of robed figures with Walter at the back. The father greeted Walter with joy, saying he already knew what the legend spoke of and was ready to fulfill his mission. After all, he had ignored it before, which caused all the problem. Walter, satisfied, ordered his men to surround the father, but he defeated all those who tried to attack him. He approached Walter, saying that he still remained firm in his convictions, just as before, and that he should not be hated for that. At that moment, the father's assistant betrayed him, casting a spell that immobilized him and delivered an electric shock, knocking him to the ground. When he woke up, the father realized that his assistant had been behind everything and had guided the protagonist there. Walter mocked, saying that it all started with a magical stone that Yuji had destroyed without difficulty. Because of that, he created an army of monsters, but later discovered that the protagonist was much more powerful than they had imagined, and his army was defeated. At that moment, an ancient dragon appeared, and the father handed the dagger to Yuji. The assistant, Johann, then realized that the protagonist was the divine emissary, and the father decided to hide to avoid revealing his identity, although Yuji continued to interfere with his plans and destroyed much of the sect. Johann, seeing this, reflected on how the protagonist even defeated the oldest dragon. Walter, on the other hand, claimed he would destroy everything in that place. He said that now his operation was at a new level, and with it, he could purify the world, even if it brought destruction. He cast a dark spell, and his eyes darkened. Walter then mocked the father's expression, saying that the time had finally come. Johann prepared to attack, but an explosion destroyed the nearby wall. The protagonist entered, defiant, and said he had a question to ask. Johann, irritated, cast a fireball at him, but the spell was absorbed by the protagonist's protection barrier. Yuji then freed his father, saying that he seemed to be in trouble. Walter, surprised and pleased to see him, thanked the father for bringing him there. When he saw his machine accumulating power, he cast a spell that resurrected his servants, turning them into monsters that attacked the protagonist. However, he used simple fire attacks to eliminate them, even though there were many, and they surrounded him. Walter, along with Johann, reached the machine. He announced that this was what gave him great power, and the purple magic spell began to spread. After defeating all the monsters, Yuji used fireballs against Walter, but without success. Walter began to transform, gaining wings, a tail, and horns, and his form became more dragon-like. Our protagonist put a shield on the father, ensuring his protection, and then cast a fireball at Walter. Walter, with his mocking tone, moved with impressive speed. While still in the air, he declared that everyone should witness the immense power he possessed. The protagonist responded that if Walter was able to dodge individual attacks, then he should try something different, and, doing so, he summoned a rain of fireballs. The fire spheres were launched at Walter, who skillfully dodged each one. However, in the end, he was hit by several. Even so, he confidently stated that he didn't feel harmed by them. Our protagonist, realizing that this was true, then decided to launch his magical slime. This slime provided an acceleration until it reached his wolf, which, in turn, put armor on both himself and the wolf. Wolf began to move with incredible speed, so fast that he ended up hitting Walter. Despite several injuries, Walter used one of the monsters and absorbed its power, completely regenerating himself. Yuji, not giving up, cast more fireballs, one of which tore off Walter's arm. However, he began to absorb the power of his allies, and in addition to healing, became even stronger. His regeneration was so fast that it was evident that a curse was in effect. With this, the protagonist became enraged and began attacking Walter. But Yuji, protecting himself with a magic shield, realized that due to the number of strikes, his shield was starting to weaken. Walter, in turn, warned that they were ready for the next level. Yuji then cast a magical net, trapping Walter to a branch. But the villain, with a malicious smile, invoked an even more powerful magical net, 10 times stronger than the previous one, and, with the help of the slimes, surrounded Walter. Then, our protagonist, taking advantage of the opportunity, meanwhile, he silently prayed, and his father, responding to the prayer, warned that something was wrong, as the spell cast should not have been like that. At this moment, the location begins to glow intensely, absorbing the curses that had been afflicting everyone present. A bright light descends from the sky, transforming a man whose magical markings start to shine. The man then asks to be observed, claiming to be the great sage. The protagonist, curious, asks who he is, and the sage reveals something unexpected. He explains that before Walter, he believed that with the protagonist's death, he himself would be chosen to save the world. However, he realized the prophecy was actually about Walter's death, which ended up summoning the great sage. The sage continues, explaining that, according to an ancient legend, a long time ago an emissary was sent to defeat the great sky dragon. However, the emissary couldn't withstand the dragon's power and lost his life quickly. Now he believes Walter performed a ritual to summon that being, something akin to the summoning of a god. Our protagonist begins to grasp the gravity of the situation. The sage then uses the infernal fire of death to attack the protagonist. He quickly defends himself, but the powerful explosions make the ground tremble. The wolf, however, is surprised to realize that the sage's magical power is on par with Yuji's. The sage rises into the skies, and the protagonist commands his slimes to prepare for battle. With a magical boost, he strengthens them, and, approaching the sage, hurls a fireball at. The sage, however, swiftly blocks the attack and counters with a strike. The protagonist wolf dodges, and Yuji responds by ordering the slimes to surround the sage with a rain of fireballs. Almost disinterestedly, the sage stops all the attacks. But the protagonist notices these spells are draining his mana and begins to wonder if the sage has infinite mana, as he keeps using the infernal fire of death without showing signs of exhaustion. Trying different strategies like ice attacks and more hellfire, nothing seems to faze the sage. He simply blocks everything with his shield and then casts a tenfold version of the infernal fire toward the protagonist. Without hesitation, the protagonist casts the same spell in return. The two attacks collide, causing a massive explosion of fire. After a few seconds, the protagonist's spell appears to have defeated the sage. Everyone around him celebrates, but the protagonist realizes his mana is nearly gone. When the fire finally clears, the sage is still standing as if nothing happened, smiling wickedly. The fight continues, now more intense, with the surrounding monsters growing even more aggressive. The protagonist, however, doesn't give up and helps other slimes defeat monsters farther away. As the sage rises from the ground, the protagonist begins to talk to him, calling him Young Sage. The sage then reveals that many years ago, he gave his life in a battle against a powerful dragon, but failed in his mission, which left him filled with regret. He concluded that no matter how much sages try to save the world, there will always be a stronger dragon destined to destroy it. So the sage decided to end this cycle of destruction by destroying the world once and for all, believing that way, no one would ever need saving again. Hearing this, Yuji realizes that what the sage is doing is practically the same thing a dragon would do. He then launches a series of infernal fireballs at the sage, while the slime warns that several monsters are approaching the city. Without hesitation, Yuji summons more fireballs to destroy the monster. Mocking the situation, the sage says Yuji's power is limited and he can't protect the world. But Yuji keeps going, summoning blasts of fire to defend the cities, even as the sage's attack drains his own life force into the negatives. Meanwhile, DR observes the situation in the cities, and seeing all the warriors united, inspires Yuji to push forward. He remembers that in the past, Yuji saved many lives and fought monsters, acts that now serve as an example for everyone. Pride grows among the warriors, who pledge to keep fighting in the name of Yuji's heroic deeds and his team. Seeing the city's efforts, Yuji feels inspired, and for the first time, realizes that accepting help from others wouldn't be a burden. He's convinced that accepting this help won't be a mistake, so he announces that he'll grant magical benefits to all the warriors, knowing that the only thing left now is to face the sage. He then decides to use the mana restore given to him by his father and fully recovers his energy, commanding his wolf to protect his father while he begins to approach the sage. The sage, intrigued, asks why the protagonist is so determined to interfere with his path to salvation. Yoi replies that he truly doesn't know the reason, but the wise man says he understands, as he once felt the same. He saved the world without having a clear motive. Still, when he remembers the people he met and helped in this world, our protagonist realizes that he does have a reason. These people are not irrelevant. He tells this to the sage, explaining that it's for them that he wants to save everything. The sage laughs at his answer and proposes a duel, saying the most powerful among them will win. He also declares that he'll use all the magic he has until his body can no longer take it. At that moment, our protagonist sees an alert on his panel. He can use divine attacks for 45 seconds. Yui recalls having used that power once before against the celestial dragon and decides to use the same attack on the sage. The blow hits directly, and the enemy falls to the ground instantly. But our protagonist doesn't stop there. He repeats the divine attack several times. Even so, the sage manages to get up, even angrier. Seeing this, our hero draws his divine dagger and, with the help of the slime, throws the weapon at his opponent, activating the divine attack once again. The force of the strike lights up the sky, and at that moment, the father understands his old prophecy about the alignment of the sun and moon. The protagonist then activates the divine blow again, now using his dagger, and at the same time casts a powerful magic barrier spell, enhanced 6 times in strength. He locks himself inside the barrier, along with the sage, to contain the destruction. Next, he summons an isolation matrix and uses the slime armor, turning the barrier into something unbreakable. Soon after, the barrier dissolves, the sky turns purple, and both disappear after the explosion. Everyone looks to the sky as the protagonist descends, surrounded by a magical light. However, the moment he touches the ground, he faints, exhausted from using so much magic. After all of this, he decides to leave the city and walks into a forest. His slime explains that the cult is still active there, so it's dangerous to stay. As he walks, he uses his slime to observe the other cities, where people are celebrating victory with parties, food, wine, and joy. Meanwhile, Suchila and the wolf feel relieved and happy that they managed to save everyone in the city. Elsewhere in the city of Ordar, three men discuss Walter's disappearance. They wonder if the final explosion had something to do with him, but no one is sure. One of them says there's no need to worry, as the new purification machine is almost ready. Once activated, it will cleanse the world again, allowing them to fulfill their mission in the name of the Blue Moon of Salvation. For them, purification is essential to be chosen in the battle against the Black Dragon of Ruin. The protagonist, Hidden, listens to all this while eating, already knowing that these men always try to cause more problem. Suddenly, Sween warns that there are monsters nearby. Right after, a huge tiger appears in front of them. The next day, our hero arrives at the guild and says he wants to take on a mission related to tigers because he encountered one the night before and defeated it easily. The receptionist, surprised, confirms the mission and says his group will be credited for the victory over the man-eating tiger. But Yui says he was alone. The girl looks at him and apologizes, thinking he lost his companions in the battle. Upon seeing the tiger's body, she realizes it was defeated with fire magic. She also notices that the spell seems to have come from a single person and asks if he specializes in Yuin-type magic. He simply replies that he's just a regular tamer. The other girls nearby hear that and are amazed. Rumors spread about a certain amateur adventurer who traveled through many cities and defeated monsters and dragons thought to be unbeatable. Soon, everyone realizes they're standing before Yugi. The sage, upon hearing that name, is stunned, realizing that Yui's fame is known all over the world. And that's how this summary ends. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and leave a like so we can keep bringing more. Comment more if you want the continuation as soon as possible. Now you'll see two similar videos. Watch both. See you next time.